Welcome to the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode explores a new topic with a guest who brings their unique experience and knowledge. Tune in and discover something new each time you listen.
Hi, and welcome to Bank Talk. I'm Charlie Kelly, your host and partner at Remedy Consulting. Today, we're going to talk fraud. We have John Waldman, president and co-founder of SBS Cybersecurity. I always like these fraud episodes because, number one, it always amazes me how creative the bad guys are. And, we've had a couple of fraud episodes in Bank Talk in the past, but this stuff keeps evolving. And I just think it's important for all of our listeners to just understand sort of what the latest is, what's going on in the space. Maybe we'll learn something about what cybersecurity means before we're done here. So without further ado, let's get to John and the Bank Talk podcast. So today I have with me John Waldman. John, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on, Charlie. Pleased to be here.
Okay, so you have a breakdown of where these fraud schemes and financial fraud is occurring, and what was interesting to me is just I always think of it as a lot of schemes targeting the old folks and the CEO, right? The CEO being the person with the biggest ego, right? Because you can get them to click that button, right? That slide seemed to say something else. Would you mind breaking that down for me a little bit? Just let the audience know where's fraud occurring and what are the stats saying?
You bet. Well, that's a great place to start. And a quick version of that is everyone is a target, right? So attackers kind of break it up into different segments, but the high level is everyone is a target. If you have money or information that a bad guy can turn into money, then you're a potential victim. And it's, as you already mentioned, it's kind of that common misconception that financial fraud primarily targets older folks. Interestingly enough, about 42% of individuals under 40 reported being a fraud victim actually lost money on average, about $400 per instance. I think in the numbers, something like 12.5 million in total losses. But victims over 40 actually had a decreasing percentage of money lost from 42% down to 38%. And then it even kind of drops a little bit further and down to 35% in your 50s and 29% in the 60s and 24% in the 70s and even down to 21% in the 80s. But the interesting correlation there is the dollars per instance go up pretty significantly from about $500, in your 40s to over $1,500, $1,650 in your 80s. So I think that that's an interesting correlation that even though folks, as you get a little bit older, are less likely to lose money, the dollar figures go up pretty significantly versus younger folks are probably more apt to lose money at a lower per instant rate. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So that was a lot to drink in. Let me ask you a question.
Yes,
Of the
please.
groups, 20s, if you just take those kind of those decade-long blocks of groups in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, et cetera, which one are targeted the most? Is it because I understood that there's a decreasing money loss, if I understood what you were saying there. The money loss is decreasing, but which group are they pinging the most?
Well, I think on the macro, the younger generations are going to be targeted more just due to higher exposure, right?
Okay.
So
And that was where I was going with the follow-up is it because of social media and because where they are and how they shop and those types of things? Is that where the lists are coming from for the most part?
Yes. So just as an example, last week, there was a $16 billion user account and password breach that hit the internet, right? And it was a collection of credentials, online credentials for 16 billion accounts. which is an unfathomable number, really. I mean, we got 8 billion people on the planet, so that's twice as many people with credentials. But especially younger generations have so many online accounts in so many different areas. Bad guys have scraped this stuff together so frequently and so in such large quantities over the years that anybody that is online on a regular type of basis is more apt to be a target of an attack from that perspective. So just in terms of internet usage, I think, the younger generations that have grown up with technology versus the older generations that may not use it quite to that same extent. It's just an exposure thing
Yeah.
from my perspective.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I would think that the most valuable person in a, in a fraud operation might be the person that can tell that Charlie Kelly profile, number
Hmm.
one is the same Charlie Kelly that's in profile number 8, right?
Right.
Data validation of some sort, right?
Hmm.
If you can get that information, you can find out, what they're doing in all these various platforms. I would imagine scamming them becomes quite a bit easier as well. Now, you might know what's going on their Facebook side, and then above and beyond that, if you can get any indication of what card they use or whatever, right? You start gathering
Right.
some info pretty quickly that becomes super valuable, whether it's a phone call fraud or a physical online attack.
Right. And it depends a little bit on what kind of scheme and scam a bad guy's running. So you've got your traditional catch-all scams as an example. Let's say you're sending a phishing email, right? And you send an email out, you have a massive group of a million email addresses, and you can send them an email that is trying to impersonate UPS, failing to deliver your Amazon package, which is almost every one of us, right? We all buy stuff from Amazon. So you're hitting the whole gamut of folks. Or you can get into what you would call spear phishing, right? Which is more of a targeted group.
Yeah.
We work in the banking space. So if you're sending an email that's impersonating UPS failing to deliver an Amazon package, that's a very wide swath versus an email that's impersonating the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve and saying your wire transfer batch got rejected. Very different group of folks. So it depends a little bit on who you're targeting, what your goal is. Hit as many folks as you can, or really dig in and get into, even like you mentioned earlier, CEO, CFO fraud, which you would call whaling, going after those big fish.
Yeah, so it's almost a difference between sort of you cast a sardine fisherman and a tuna fisherman to some degree,
Yeah.
right? Like you got to know what you're doing if you're tuna fishing to find where he's living and what have you.
Yep.
But you catch one and you're in pretty good shape. If you're a sardine fisherman, probably not going to catch a lot of big fish, but catch a lot of little ones, and you're still doing pretty well for yourself.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Great analogy in terms of little fish versus big fish. You might only need a couple big fish, but they're a lot harder to find, a lot harder to catch than 1,000 sardines.
Excellent. Well, okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time around some of these schemes. And, we've had previous podcasts on fraud. I think the audience is always interested in just keeping up to date. How are these things evolving, right? And,
Yep.
I think we named this the top 5 schemes. I don't know that we need to cover the top 5. What I'd like to understand a little bit better is, I think this stuff continues to evolve. It's not as much grandma getting the phone call that, one of the grandkids is in jail and please send me money. I think they're becoming more and more sophisticated. So would you mind just running us through, some of the more interesting ones that you're seeing recently and maybe some evolution of this, if you could?
You bet. And again, just to harken back to that previous conversation, these scams range from anywhere to the old Nigerian scams that still exist today. Again, talking about target audience, right? Where they're targeting folks that really want to believe some Nigerian prince has $1 million for them. Like if you're paying attention to this stuff, you in your space and me in my space, we're not falling for that. So but they want that. They want that particular individual. Now, you also mentioned grandma getting the phone call about their grandkid needing some money, some bail money to get out of jail. AI has really evolved these schemes today to become much more realistic in a lot of different cases. And unfortunately, by more realistic, we're talking deep fakes, voice cloning, those types of things. So if you can get somebody talking on the phone for 30 seconds, you can clone their voice or impersonate a celebrity online or even create a video of individuals in some of these cases. So schemes and scams using AI are much more sophisticated today, even all the way down to that phishing email level, where you used to be able to tell that Nigerian scam was a hoax because the person sending you the email didn't speak English as a first language, right? So there was grammatical issues and it was real broken. Now AI can create you a much better email that sounds like it was written by somebody that speaks English on a regular basis. So AI is evolving these schemes to be much more believable, instead of getting a phone, if you're the grandma that's getting a phone call saying, "Hey, we got your kid here in jail," or, "We're holding them hostage, send us $1,500." Now they can replicate the voice of that individual to really sound and convince grandma to send that $1,500, making those things more believable.
And I would
So,
think also on that side, you would think that with the data they might be able to gather, right? If they,
mhm,
depending again, which scammer they are, with the data they'd be able to gather, they might know a lot about the grandkid, right? Or,
absolutely.
they may be able to answer some of grandma's questions where maybe they couldn't a couple of years ago, or, if you're less sophisticated, maybe you wouldn't be able to answer them. They may have some generic way around them, but more specific certainly gets grandma to open the checkbook up or run to the bank or whatever.
Absolutely. If you're a scammer, a criminal that is specifically calling an individual grandma and has gone through the trouble of voice cloning of the grandson or granddaughter or whoever it is, yeah, you're 100% right. They'll check social media, friend you on social media, whether it's Insta or the kids these days don't use Facebook. My daughter tells me, my 14-year-old daughter tells me that's old people social
Okay.
media.
Okay.
So whatever it is, Snap or Insta or, I mean, they'll do their homework and make that real convincing. That's for sure. Your kids on spring break in Panama City or, where the case is, if they're posting on social, they'll know about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, what else? What else? Give us a couple other ones that are, you'd kind of say were top of mind or you're
hmm
hearing a lot about these days.
Yeah. So the evolution kind of continues from there. So you think about what that looks like in terms of a bad guy doing their homework. One of the other really big and impactful situations has probably the most unique and disturbing name, which is called pig butchering. And so this is a really advanced scam that takes a long time and involves creating trust. It's actually really similar to like a romance scam where you befriend somebody online and you kind of set this scheme in motion and you get them to trust you over a period of time. So a lot of these pig butchering scams involve cryptocurrency or investments and trading, stock market trading, things like that, where the fraudster, the criminal, actually teaches the other person, the victim in these cases, how to do something like crypto investing. There's a really, really impactful story about the now former CEO of a bank that failed due to the actions of this CEO. His name was Sean Hayes at this bank in Kansas. And the CEO got lured in by a pig butchering scheme, getting the CEO of the bank to invest little bits of of money into cryptocurrency. And the scammers would show them how it works, show them how much money they're making. And it ended up culminating in this CEO of this bank in Kansas ended up stealing $47 million from his bank and his community as a part of this scheme, believing that he was going to be the savior of this bank and do all of these wonderful things for the community. They're going to make so much money off of this crypto. And then the scammers, the criminals just stole the money, and then you leave the guy, in this particular case, this bank CEO, empty-handed. out $47 million. And yeah, he's spending the next 25 years in jail from
So
as
they
a
showed
result of
them
that scam.
they basically showed them how to make money in
Hmm.
little bursts, and then kind of said, "Hey, why don't you kind of go all in with it?" Must have been something along those lines, huh?
Yep,
But
that's exactly right. Yep. Make a little bit of money here, see how that works. All right, now let's dip in a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then there's usually a real big ask at the end where the fraud in the scheme kind of culminates in the big final play from that perspective. There's a ton of like YouTube videos. If you just look up crypto pig butchering or scams along those lines online, there's a lot of stories about victims that, I mean, lose $50,000, $50 million in this case. It's extremely impactful.
oh. So is it all financial, or are there other elements of this that are not financial? I thought I saw there's sort of a dating version to this pig butchering as well, which is might even be more disturbing than the financial piece.
Absolutely. So again, very similar situation when we're talking about romance scams. So macro perspective is fraudsters or cyber criminals or whatever you want to call them, the bad guys, attackers, they're after two things: information and money. And it's easier to get information than it is to get the money, and bad guys are really good at turning information into money. So, the alternative kind of similar situation from a pig butchering scam to a romance scam is kind of the attack vector, right? So usually the same kind of situation. Find somebody online that is lonely, maybe looking for companionship, and you build the story over time. A lot of times they'll do fake video calls, they'll send victims gifts. They'll really butter somebody up. And the person in the romance scam side of the world is really looking for love and connection. So they're buying it. And again, it culminates in the big ask or the big final play. A lot of times the individual pose, one that I know of that was shared with me by a friend a number of years ago was they had some gal from a foreign country had been communicating with her uncle for years. And it culminated in, I'm coming to America. I got to America. I got in a car accident on my way from the airport to come see you. I'm in the hospital. You can't come visit me. I don't want you to see me like this. I don't have any money. Send me $5,000. I need to pay these bills. And people do,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
So, and then they disappear. So it's very similar to kind of the pig butchering scheme, but a little bit different. But all ends up in building that trust, building that relationship, culminating in that final play or the big final act, and then disappearing.
Yeah, and I would imagine even almost human trafficking side of this, which would be, I would imagine you could do the same thing and then lure
Yes.
somebody somewhere,
Yep.
and never a good thing's going to happen there, probably.
Absolutely right.
Of the roughly 500,000 scamming attempts per year, which remain the most profitable? Are there any stats out there that kind of say which are the most profitable? Any material out there that would kind of tell you which of these are going to remain profitable going forward?
We'll be right back.
Is your technology spend getting a little out of hand? Are you worried about making those big strategic moves because of those hefty vendor contracts? Or maybe you just feel like your technology is currently holding you back. In today's banking world, overspending on technology is a risk you just can't take. Going up against those major vendors on your own can be tough, expensive, and especially when the contracts are designed to benefit them. That's where Remedy can come in. Remedy Consulting helps our clients stay competitive and grow their business with the right technology, products, and their spending strategies. Not a Remedy client yet? Head on over to remedyconsult.net for a free review of your tech stack, spending, and contract terms. Even if you're not the perfect fit, you'll walk away
with expert advice and confidence in your technology decisions. Check us out at remedyconsult.net or give us a call at 262-955-7776. Thanks for tuning in. And now let's get back to the episode.
I don't have any particular stats around which ones are most profitable from that perspective, so apologies for that. But kind of from a pure profit perspective, they're typically going to be the attacks, sort of like if we go back to, are you fishing for sardines? Are you fishing for tuna? The big attacks that take longer to find and curate and build are going to be most profitable, like the pig butchering situations, the romance scams, and then one that we haven't talked about yet, ransomware, which is a really interesting kind of take because ransomware has evolved and changed a lot over the last 7 or so years. If you go back, 2018 was probably what we would have considered the year of ransomware, where ransomware is all over the place. Everybody was becoming a victim of ransomware. Defenses weren't what they are today. Cyber insurance companies or insurance companies were really new to trying to figure this stuff out. Insurance companies were paying ransoms all over the place. That inflated the price and the demands from a ransom perspective. And about 80% of organizations that became ransomware victims ended up paying. Today, that's really only about 25%, but the dollar amounts per ransomware attack are significantly increased versus where they were 6, 7 years ago as well. I think
So help me understand
Yes.
that stat, John. So the 80 versus the 25, if I understood that
Mhm.
correctly, it used to be 80 would pay, now 25
Yes.
pay.
Right.
Is it because there's better ways to detect the scammer? Like if somebody shuts my whole operation down and I don't have a way to do anything about it, I would think you either pay or you fix it, right? Right, one of
Yep.
those two things. And
Yes.
that would be the difference between the 80 and the 25. Can you help
Yes.
me
So
understand that stat a little better?
absolutely. So it's driven by two, in my opinion, two different elements. The first is cyber insurance is much more mature than it was 7 years ago. Insurance companies lost their shorts paying ransoms, so they made sure that the folks that are buying cyber insurance have good security practices in place so that you can recover instead of have to pay. And the other alternative to that is the market has corrected itself and also improved its defenses over the last 7 years, regardless of cyber insurance or not. So, in order to get cyber insurance today, you have to have a certain level of cybersecurity maturity, and having world class data backups is definitely one of those things. So, if you do become a victim to ransomware, instead of paying, you can just restore and recover because ransomware
Oh,
is still nasty stuff. So there's also the detection part of it as well. How do you prevent that from happening in the first place? But prevention isn't 100%. So
yeah, the backup. Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. Is if I've got it backed up and all I need to do is replace a couple laptops, right?
yep,
That's a lot
yes,
easier than that's not. Yeah, that might not be worth 8 million to me or whatever the number
exactly
you're
right.
asking for.
And
I gotcha.
that's the goal. I mean, when we talk to our clients, it's how do you not have to pay a ransom? How do you work through these things? How do you feel well prepared? And the Conference of State Banking Supervisors even put out a ransomware self-assessment tool for banks and other financial institutions a few years ago, updated it, I think, last year or the year before. So a really good checklist for any financial institution out there to say, hey, are we really prepared for ransomware?
Gotcha. That's excellent. Okay. I think of a managed services firm as somebody who might come in and manage all my laptops and my sort of my email and all that
Hmm.
type of thing. I think cybersecurity as a term has been overused. So what differentiates, let's say, yeah, and I'll let you use SBS cybersecurity for this, but what I've heard of managed services firms that have a cybersecurity sort of a
Hmm.
spiel to them. I've heard folks that do log auditing that have a spiel that uses that cybersecurity term. And I've got SBS cybersecurity in front of me, you guys, right? Can you just help me explain to the audience When you say cybersecurity protection, what does that mean these days? What does it look like?
Yeah, great question. And you're 100% right, Charlie. Cybersecurity is a very general term. There's a lot of different ways to do cybersecurity. There's a lot of different careers in the world of cybersecurity. And it really means just how do we protect our organization from internet facing bad stuff, right? So a managed service provider would typically build, manage, and protect a network or devices or servers or something along those lines. So they're more of the technical implementation of cybersecurity. They might sell products, they might implement products and services, hardware, software, all of those types of things. There are managed security service providers that are more focused on logging, monitoring, and detection of attacks on the network. So they're probably not installing patches or building new laptops or building new servers, but they're really just watching the network to say, hey, bad stuff's happening. You need to go do something about that. Here's an alert. Here's a log. We shut down this attack over here. There are vendors all over the place, hardware vendors, software application type vendors that will do specific cybersecurity things. Maybe it's somebody building and hosting a secure information and event management platform or a SIEM. There's other hardware providers out there. Everybody kind of says that they do cybersecurity stuff, right?
Sure.
So we're a little bit different in that regard. We're more of a cyber GRC company. GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance. You might just say that we're kind of a cyber risk management firm. So what we do at SBS is we focus on the upfront planning and preparation around building a strong information or cybersecurity program for our clients. What do you need to know upfront? You have to start with a risk assessment. It's kind of one of our big things. Like you have to know what you have and know how risky it is before you can really have a good plan to manage that risk, right? So we help our clients do that, build cyber policies and procedures, do training and education, figure out roles and responsibilities, all that kind of stuff. And then on the back end, we do cybersecurity testing, whether that's a compliance exam or audit. In our space, we typically call that an IT audit, where we look at the governance of your organization or institution and say, hey, are you doing what you say you're doing? And is it enough? We also have a hacking team of our network security engineers that do vulnerability assessments or penetration tests, red teams, purple teams, password cracking, you name it. On the technology side of the world, we can handle that from that aspect, and with a goal in mind of really partnering with our clients to help them really truly understand what their risks are and how they stack up against those risks so that they can do a couple things to move the needle, get a little bit better, and mitigate their cyber risk.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, and that makes sense to me because I think, I never understood, whether you're a bank, a credit union, what have you. A lot of these community banks and credit unions they're small businesses, right? So,
Yeah.
maybe they're under 100 employees or 200 employees, and as a small business owner myself, I say to
Mm,
myself, I don't know where my holes are, right? Like you learn over time where your holes are, but for
right.
somebody to come in and go, in the world today, this is the places they could hit you.
Yep.
And therefore, this is the place you should either have a provider test against or what have you, right? That clears up quite a bit, right? Because
Absolutely.
I think a managed services provider could probably back up your data, but that
Yes.
doesn't mean they necessarily would stop the 25 ways somebody has to get in to try to take money out of the company, take money from the bank's customers, take money from whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Awesome.
And I suppose in bank space or the credit union space, to some degree, the regulators are asking these types of questions as well. So you have to be on the line
Yes.
with what where they think the threats are versus where reality says the threats are, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And banks and financial institutions are regulated and have to do certain things in certain time frames. They have to do all of the testing stuff that we were just talking about, IT audits and pen tests and vulnerability assessments. There's different scales. Some of them are just check the box things, and some of them are, like you said, hey, real world, how would a bad guy target our institution? Because we have money, we have a lot of money, we have a lot of information. We're a pretty prime target. How do we know?
Gotcha. Okay. Before you and I got on this, I had to log into Zoom, right? And somehow to log into Zoom, I need a multi-factor authentication, facial recognition, right? Like it seems like this is harder to get into my bank account, right? And I guess my question would be, is the world so paranoid about this that it's kind of normal for everything to require this real deep security to not allow you into their app? Or is it paranoia because a hack costs the company a lot of money if you're a software company? Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, and to be honest, it's probably a little bit of both. Security has become something that's gotten built into stuff more, in our opinion, probably not quite enough yet, but we're sort of at that crossroads of, yeah, it's kind of too much and a pain in the butt. And so sometimes we don't even want to do it versus the ease of use. We've been doing cybersecurity for 20 years back before we even called it cybersecurity. And one of the key messages that we talk to all of our clients about is there's a balance that you have to strike between convenience and security always, right? Because you can't be so secure that you can't use the thing, but you can't be so convenient that
Anybody
a
get into it?
hacker can
Sure.
get into it and steal it. Therein lies the balance. And I can relate, there are times we've got a password manager, we've got multi-factor authentication, and it takes you 3 minutes to get logged into an app because you have to log into 3 different things in order to prove your identity.
Yeah, that's
Identity
a
is
good point. Yeah,
becoming
I would think usage has got to be balanced with
yes.
and maybe, right? Maybe the software firms are thinking, more security is better, right? But then I would imagine from a usability perspective, it may be costing them money because people may say, maybe I just won't do that, right? Maybe maybe I use Zoom one less time today because I just don't. I'm exhausted, right? Like I'm exhausted trying to log into this thing.
Yep. And so some of it just has more to do with usability and functionality than the security aspect, because the security is good. I mean, you might think to yourself, well, what happens if somebody steals my Zoom password? Not that big a deal compared to your bank account, but are you using the same Zoom password for Zoom as you are for other things? So there's this daisy chain of things that leads to 16 billion credentials being, shared across the internet and it being a real big deal. So
Good
uh,
point.
we're we're gearing towards more functionality with the advent of passwordless login processes. Some of these companies like Okta and ID.me and some of these other organizations are figuring this out. It's coming, some of the ease of use to be able to consolidate some things. CISA's big push over the last couple of years, thanks to Jen Easterly, about software being secure by design is really, really important, because then we run into less issues with software vulnerabilities, being able to access stuff, and you can make some of these things a little bit more convenient and ease that use. Rather than what we do today is everybody says, oh, well, we built this app. And then somebody says, well, how do you make it secure? And they're like, ah, crap. We have to figure out how to bolt security onto this thing. And as you know, as you bolt stuff on, things get fragmented. So,
The software design is kind of going towards security is
yes,
one of the pieces of the architecture rather than a bolt on later or something to think about later.
you got it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Well, John, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been very informative.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Charlie. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
All righty. Take care.
You too.
So that's all for Bank Talk. Appreciate everybody listening in today. Have a good day and keep on learning.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast brought to you by Remedy Consulting. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and share our work with others. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.